How do music and politics intersect these days? I mean, when you were coming through there, it was much more overt. I had an argument with somebody here in the Irish Times the other day. It was a typical two old middle-aged men arguing type of argument about how protest music didn't exist anymore in the same way as it had with Dylan in the 60s, or indeed with the Clash and yourself in the 1980s. And, the argument as it tends to happen these days dribbled out onto Twitter, and there was a bit of toing and froing about how there's plenty of radical hip hop out there, and there's plenty of music. It's just that old middle-aged white blokes don't listen to it. What do you think?
Old middle-aged white blokes don't listen to it. I mean, basically, what's happened since you and I were listening to I was making political music in the 20th century, is that music has lost its vanguard role in youth culture.
Yeah.
If you want to know, where the new punk rock is, it's Fortnite. Whether we like it or not. That's just the way things have changed around that. But music still has an important role to play. That's why more people want to go to gigs. It's not forgotten. But it doesn't have that vanguard role. Yeah. In the 1980s, if I wanted people in Dublin to hear what I had to say, there weren't many mediums open to me. No one was asking me to come and write in the Irish Times. Back in the day. So if I wanted to do that, I had to learn to play guitar, write songs and do gigs, and hope eventually that would get me across the Irish Sea, and I'd be able to stand on stage physically in Dublin and make my point and make a record, send a record out there. Now, if you're 15 or 18 years old and you have something to say, you've got so many different ways to do that. You can make a film on your iPhone and edit it on your iPhone and get it out there. So the need to get up in front of people and actually perform, which is a big ask for a lot of people. It doesn't seem a long way. It's the height of this table, the stage in Whelan's, but that step up for some people is a big psychological step. You don't need to do that anymore. So Owen Jones can write for The Guardian rather than having to form a synthesizer duo with Laurie Penny or whatever,
Yeah, although he looks like he'd fit into a synthesizer duo.
Exactly. There's a lot of young people out there who would do that. But having said that, there are still people who are using music in the way that we used it in the 20th century. In the 20th century, all young people were marginalised. There wasn't no young people talking in the Irish Times. You just didn't hear it, or any other newspaper, daily newspaper. So we had to use music. Then it was our social medium. It told you how to dress, who to hang out with, where to go, who not to hang out with. Although we didn't think of it as a social medium, that's what it was. But now there are still communities who are marginalised, like young black men in the UK, who are still using music as a way of breaking down the barriers of their marginalisation. If take Stormzy, for instance, in order for him to get into my timeline, he needed to make some great music. And that gave him a platform. And from that platform, he was able to speak about Grenfell and attack the Prime Minister live on TV. I mean, how powerful is that? So don't tell me there's no politics in music anymore. It's just that the dynamic of youth culture has changed. But there's still people out there making music, and music is still bringing people together. Not so much to change the world, but to give them that feeling that they're not alone. What I'm talking about at my gigs is how do we deal with our cynicism? How do we keep our cynicism at bay? One of the things that you get from coming to a gig and all singing There's Power in the Union, one of my songs, you get a sense that there are other people who give a shit about this stuff. So you're not in isolation. There's a room full of people in Dublin who care about this stuff. And as a member of the audience, you want to take that home, because I take that home. When I come off stage, my activism is recharged from the way the audience responds. And what I'm trying to do is make the audience go away with that same feeling so that their activism is recharged as well. You can call it preaching to the converted if you like. But what I'm doing is helping the people to kick their cynicism to the curb, because there's a lot of cynicism out there these days. And music has the ability to kind of get past that, And it doesn't have to be political music as well, by the way. If you go and see, let's say you go and see Adele, and she's singing a song that you've invested a huge amount of emotion in, and you're singing it and 1,000 other people are singing it. Whatever emotion you've put into that is kind of accepted. There's a solidarity in there. There's a communion that you can't get online. You can't get that on Facebook.
And that's the kind of thing, isn't it? Because if, and I accept everything you say there about Stormzy and about Fortnite and about everything else, but if the way in which people are interacting or speaking or finding their voice or doing that is through digital platforms, for example, it's going to work in a different way than the kind of, there is something tangible. And also there's something, I don't know, transcendent, I suppose, about music itself, isn't it? Yeah. It's highly emotional. Yeah. It works in a different kind of a way than a social media post, for example.
But it has something that you can't get on social media, which is that sense of being in a communion with other people around something that everybody loves. You know, people.
So have we lost that?
No, it's still there. It's still there. It's just not the main focus of youth culture. It's not the be all and end all, you know, as it was in the 20th century. That's why youth pop music was so broad, because it had to encompass everything that young people experienced, all the way from politics to, you know, to love and football, everything, all in there, you know, and how you could work with that. And everybody was watching it. Everyone was listening to John Peel. Everyone was tuning into Dave Fanning. Everyone was like in that same space. So if you did something, the community would all see it. That's atomised now, both in the terms of the music industry is atomised. But
So that
also,
means there'll never be another punk rock.
No, the youth school strikers are the new punk rock. You're looking for the Clash again. Forget it. There's no going to be white boys with guitars doing that again. You know, there'll be white boys with guitars, but it won't have that dynamic. I don't think. Who knows? It might, but you're looking in the wrong place, man. If you're looking for another.
So
Clash.
Extinction Rebellion and the kind of communities which have developed around that, and the kind of the street activism that develops around that. That's the new
I think
punk.
so, yeah. I think
Yep.
the accountability movements, Extinction Rebellion, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, this is where the cutting edge in our culture and youth culture is now. I went down to Bristol week before last, for Extinction Rebellion, and I was invited specifically by XR Youth, young people, organised, and they clearly never put a gig on. I only realised that when the desk caught fire. But fortunately, by then, the speakers had already been, and they were all very young people. A 14-year-old girl gave the most powerful speech, reminded me of doing gigs for the miners in 1984, going into the coalfields, doing the gigs where the miners were either on the picket line or in jail, and it would be miners' wives who came and spoke, working class women who'd never spoken in public before, talking about the strike from an angle of personal experience, some of the most powerful stuff I've ever seen. And these young women had that same sort of vibe. I was very, very impressed with them.
I suppose when I listen to your music, and it's not all political, by the way. Obviously, it's
true.
It's about
Life's
lots
more
of
than
other stuff. It's about
politics,
life
yeah.
and love and everything and everything else. It's in a tradition. Obviously, people would recognise that 20th century tradition of protest music through Dylan and Woody Guthrie and back in that kind of way too. But it also goes back to kind of a previous sort of radical tradition of the pamphlet, doesn't it? As a way.
Yeah, it is. And oddly enough, I've just written a pamphlet called The 3 Dimensions of Freedom, that's trying to get to grips with the idea of agency, really. That I'm concerned that the flourishing of social media has left us in a situation where freedom is defined merely as freedom of speech, the right to say whatever you want to say, whenever you want to say it, to whoever you want to say it, with no comeback. And if that's the definition of liberty, then forget Martin Luther King. We have to look no further than Donald Trump's Twitter feed to see that shining example of what it means to be free. You know, the problem with Trump's Twitter feed is, first, he has no conception of equality, the second dimension of freedom, in that he's willing to let other people speak. He's not. He doesn't want to hear anybody else's voice, and he's not willing to respect their point of view. You know, if you're going to be in a free society, you're empowered by liberty, but you also have to reciprocate that right to everybody else and respect that right, so that people respect your right. And I'm afraid that without equality being there, then liberty really is nothing more than privilege. And you can see that, you know, with those predominantly right-wing commentators who, you know, throw their arms up whenever they're challenged over something they've said and say, oh, you're not allowed to say X, Y, Z now, when they've just actually said X, Y, Z anyway, and it's said it in The Spectator or on the TV or whatever. You know, it's not free speech they want, it's free reign. And I think that without equality, liberty, really, freedom of speech is nothing more than privilege.
And what's the third freedom?
The third freedom is accountability, the most important one of all, I think. And we're in a situation now where that's the hole in the donut, the thing that's missing in Western political discourse, the ability to hold those in power to account, not just politically either. If you imagine freedom to be a positive thing, it broadly is, but there are dangerous types of freedom. Freedom without accountability is impunity. And we have a president of the United States and a prime minister in Great Britain who've lived their lives mostly, by rejecting any form of accountability. That's very, very dangerous, you know. And the notion that democracy is enough, I'm not so sure about that. Democracy and accountability are not synonymous. You know, their relationship is more like a Venn diagram, in which at times of consensus, there's a lot of overlap between democracy and accountability. But there are other times, such as now, when the two are sliding away from one another. And democracy is no longer, particularly in a voting system that we have in the UK and the Americans have as well, that pure democracy on its own is not enough for the citizens to feel they have some agency over their lives. The choices that they're offered are far too narrow. So, you know, I'm trying to make that case that we need to have greater accountability, but it's not just in terms of authoritarianism or algorithms or neoliberalism itself, but also in terms of our own social discourse online. You know, it has an element there, you know, the idea of the safe space, which is
often derided.
Derided, yeah, because it's derided by people who want to say whatever they want to whoever they want and no comeback. A safe space is not designed to control the debate. It's designed to control the tone of the debate. A safe space is about respect, it's about equality, it's about deliberation, it's about not shouting at one another, it's about not being provocative. So you get someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, and he's just a provocateur, he just wants to wind people up. You know, they're trying to trigger people. And you can't have a sort of reasonable discourse with people like that who are just coming for the wind-up. So those young people who are creating safe spaces, they're digital natives, most of them. They understand that if you express views that are considered outside of the mainstream, you're going to get attacked for it. So they're just trying to set up a situation where everyone can say what they want to say and be respected. You know, I've had a bit of a ding-dong with regard to some of the things that Morrissey has been saying. Morrissey can say whatever he likes. I'm not trying to stop Morrissey's freedom of speech. He can say whatever he likes, but what he can't have is not be challenged about it. He can't turn around and say, as he said the other day, as an artist, I have no freedom of speech. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concept. What he means is, as an artist, I should be able to say whatever I like and people should just be, you know, oh, well, Morrissey said something. It don't work like that anymore. So I'm not really so much having a go at him as having a go at a media that doesn't hold him to account. You know, that's what's missing in that process. And it's left to me to make, you know, piffy posts on Facebook in order to get a bit of accountability there. And it goes both ways. I mean, you know, having said that, this isn't a left or right argument. The Labour Party needs to be held to account for its membership that are expressing anti-Semitic views.
I mean, that's been a nightmare for the Labour Party.
Exactly, it has been a nightmare, and they haven't really been able to get to grips with it because of the slippery nature of social media. You know, in the old days, it was much easier to control it. There were gatekeepers around those kind of things, and those people were kept at, you know, either out of the party or at arm's length, which is not the way to deal with it, obviously. But now, you know, the process has got to where it's, you know, taking up so much of the bandwidth for what the Labour Party's messages should be. And the awful, sickening irony is the people who are, you know, winding it up are people who think they're defending Corbyn. They don't understand that they're giving the enemies of his project a stick with which to beat him.
Isn't that kind of the sort of the ultimate, one of the ultimate downsides of social media is everybody just jumps into the two polarized camps and just, you know, slings insults to each other. You know, that it's not, doesn't lend itself to productive discourse.
Social media is a dark mirror to society. It's not social media that's the problem. Social media is a great invention because it allows people to communicate. It allows people to express themselves without having to learn to play the guitar, to write songs, do gigs, get up on stage, come to Dublin. I'm all in favour of social media. But we are still human beings. We still have that dark side, and we still, you know, there are those who take pleasure in tormenting others, sadly. You know, no society is free from that. No society is free from that strain of bigotry, and that's why accountability is a very, very important aspect in the age of social media. You know, I'm trying to offer a set of parameters by which we can deal with these problems. Because in the old days, in the 20th century, not only did we have the clash and dodgy haircuts, but we also had, each of us had our ideology. And people understood about ideology, and that gave you a framework with which to test ideas in the world and see if they were, if they fit with your principles. We kind of don't have that anymore. So by bringing together the idea of liberty, equality and accountability, I'm trying to set up a framework in which we can look at situations, look at characters, and try and decide whether or not they are really upholding the principles on which our society it should be based, which is a principle of fairness, a principle of respect, and a principle of accountability. That's what democracy is supposed to be about. But as I say, at the moment, I fear that the two are drifting apart.